When I was very young, I had the interesting luck, if you like, of living in a series of haunted houses. I was living in Europe and I went from one to another. The first one I stayed about 10 days. I didn't know they were haunted. I found out the hard way, and then I moved after about 11 days to another house, and it was my first experience because before that I'd never really believed in them. And then I came to Australia and lived in another haunted house which lasted for about 6 months. And on the night my father died, the night after my father died, there was this enormous crash, like a bomb went off in the wardrobe. That's the only way I can describe it. I wasn't there alone, other people with me. And after that, there was no ghost there anymore. So I've always figured that the old man came in and was out. And that in itself wasn't important, but what was important to me was that opened my mind to the reality of life beyond death. And so then when I was in a clinical practice some years later, and I had somebody under deep hypnosis tell me that their problems all began back in 1700 and something as a black slave, I had an open mind to it because of two things. One was the ghost and stuff I'd seen, and the second was the fact I had a dream when I was 11, when I was a fully grown man, and at the time I remember thinking when I was 11, I must have lived that before. So that intrigued me, and I worked with this man on his past lives to see what it would bring if I went along with it. And he was completely cured. And I have to make the point that at the time I was the last resort. I was the point of last resort. He'd been to every bod and his dog, including psychologists and psychiatrists and you name it, doctors and whatever, and no one could do anything for him, but in a very serious way. So as a last desperate attempt, he rang me, which shows how much I was esteemed in those days. And he actually worked with me for a number of months, and he was completely cured. And it actually cured a few other of his problems that he actually didn't come to me for as well. So that, at the beginning, for me, was the eye-opener, if you like, that all of a sudden I knew there's something much more to life than we understood. But I'm a bit of a scientist. I've always been a bit pragmatic. I mean, I've got a science background in medical science, and I thought, well, this is all very good. What explanation for that could it be? I looked through my different explanations, and I thought, well, I'm going to research this. So I began to get subject after subject after subject, and they all began to remember the same thing, well, not the same things, their own lives, but very similar stories. And so I thought, okay, well, I want to really nail this down, you know, I want to know this is true or not. So I put together an expedition of 4 people who I'd sort of got as guinea pigs, who did not remember past lives, who did not believe necessarily in past lives, I don't mind. And they all went into deep hypnosis, and they all recalled past lives, but they didn't know whether to believe one another for themselves. So I did some checking, found out the facts, and found out, yes, well, their stories had facts in them, they seemed right. So let's fly them to Europe, to where they were supposed to have lived. One 150 years ago, one 200 years ago, one again 200 years ago, and one was in the 1930s. So we flew them back to the countries they'd never been in their life. We parked them in the country to see could they remember their way around. And I used hypnosis to bring these memories conscious to them. And from the moment they actually got in the area, they knew their way around. And they took me to the old houses and other things that they'd remembered. And there were very specific things that I'd asked them about in Sydney before we left. that they were to take me to when they got into those countries. And if those things were there, that was the most confirming evidence you could ever have for reincarnation. For instance, one remembered a little chapel in France in 1700 and something, where in this chapel there were diamond-shaped blue-grey tiles, a particular font of a particular shape and an unusual position on the left, and there were other features. And when I got to France, this person took me all the way from a village, the way the coaches used to go, across about 90 kilometres, to this old country house, which is exactly as she described in Sydney before we left, in all ways. It was unusual. It had arches where the coaches went and everything else. She took us to the chapel via a shortcut that even, you know, we had no knowledge of. And then when we got in the chapel, there were all the facts, all the blue-grey tiles and everything else she told us about. Now, another lady, Gwen MacDonald, she did very much the same. She took us to a place in Somerset, and this was all, by the way, recorded. We took a film crew with us and recorded every 50,000 feet of film, a bit like we're doing now. Every single thing was recorded as we did it, with witnesses, including witnesses from the universities. So when we got with Gwen, she had told us in Sydney, now I grabbed this one, she had told me under trance in Sydney that on a particular day in Somerset in 1700 and something, she had tripped and cut her foot. And a kind old farmer took her on the back of his cart to his home, bathed and bandaged her foot, and then took her home. While she was riding on the back of his cart, she saw stones from Glastonbury Abbey, and she used to like the old Abbey. And she told him off that he shouldn't be pinching stones from the Abbey. And he said, well, they're better on my floor than the Abbey, because he was taking them for his floor. And she noted the markings on one of these stones, and I asked her, under trance, to draw the markings on the stone for me. And which she did, and she held up 3 fingers like that, and she said, and there was a stonemason's mark on the top left-hand corner. And then she described the stones. She told me the house that they were in was being put 20 feet from a stream, about a mile walk from Glastonbury Abbey. That on the way there you'd pass Pilgrim's Inn. It's a very unusual building, and she described that and drew that for me. And she told me in the past life that when she died, or before she died, she sat in the Abbey on a particular night and she described all these things in the Abbey, these small details. When we flew her to England and we took her down to the Abbey, she took us straight to the place she'd sat and to all the little things she described to me under hypnosis. Now, she had never been to that country. She then took us for a walk across down the road to where the Pilgrim's Inn was, which still is, but it's now called the Georgian Pilgrim. And it was exactly as she described in every detail. And then she took us on a further walk to a stream, to a chicken shed. A very old chicken shed, I will admit, but a chicken shed. And she said, that's it, that's the old house, 20 feet from a stream. Well, she said it was 20 feet from a stream. We didn't know. We went and asked the owner. And the owner said, I have no idea. You'll have to ask the old owner. He lives up on the hill up there. So we went up to him. And he said, he said, yeah, it used to be 5 houses. It was condemned. I pulled the end ones down and I built the middle ones into a big old chicken shed. I said, okay. We said, what's on the floor? I don't know. So we went back down to the present owner. Asked him what's on the floor. He said, well, I bit on the front's concrete, but other than that I don't know. And when you look inside, it was just all dirt. So we got out the money and we said, how much do you want to dig down? And we paid him and he dug down, and we come back the next morning and here he was hosing off when we got there all these stones from Glastonbury Abbey. So we had the place 20 feet from the stream. She found it, all the stones from Glastonbury Abbey, and of course we filmed them and we recorded them and we photographed them and we did everything else to them. And then Gwen went in and she went around the stones to find the exact stone with the markings of them that she had drawn for me under hypnosis in Sydney, and we found it. And we held the drawing here, and we held the stone here, and we compared the two and they were the same. And the most important feature was the three fingers up in the top left-hand corner of the stone that we could clearly see. You can't fake that. There is no way she could have known. No one even today knew that stone was there. No one. So it was an amazing feat. So when we came back from England, or Europe, because we spent 3 months running around Europe, it was a huge change for me. It was like suddenly all the doubt, because I had a lot of doubt, you know, in the old science background, I was sort of, I was like this. Half of me said yeah, part of me said no, and after that there wasn't any no left anymore. It was just, wow, what's it all about? And so that was a big changing point for me. But you have to also understand that at the time, I wasn't atheist, but I was, let's say agnostic, but a little bit on the atheist side. Because, you know, I mean, I looked at the world and thought, well, how could there be anything but this? So that opened my mind, and I realised, well, there's a lot more to the world than just this. And then I looked at science, and of course science tells you, when you really examine it, that we're all made of atoms. And if you know what's in an atom, you have protons, neutrons, electrons, electromagnetic energy. You can break down the protons into quarks, but the reality is they're just small particles joined by electromagnetic energy. And there is no consciousness in electromagnetic energy, and there's no consciousness in a particle of matter. So when you put together all the atoms that make the body, there's really no difference between the atoms that make the body and that light that's looking at me. That's electromagnetic energy. But the light has no consciousness, matter has no consciousness, and the body made of matter has no consciousness. Therefore, that consciousness has to come from somewhere else. And that's the first real scientific evidence that you cannot, the whole universe is made up of matter, of atoms. So if you can't put your consciousness down to somewhere in that matter, where do you put it down to? It has to come somewhere else. And that's a scientific fact. Get out the physics books. So when you put those things together and you see the reality from a scientific point of view and the reality from what we experience in our experiments and our running around the world, well then you find, well suddenly, you know, you really can't doubt it anymore.